Have you ever wondered what it takes to survive, or even better, to thrive? Clearly this might be a life or death skill. My name is Richard Hill, and this video lecture is about how you can enhance resilience in yourself, your friends, loved ones, or if you're a mental health helper, in your clients. Over the next 30 minutes or so, we'll be exploring what resilience is and what types of skills we need to have it if we would be resilient. Several years ago, Meg Cabanato embarked on a project to find out just how hardy people prevailed over adversity they encountered. Interviewing people in Australia and New Zealand who had prevailed over adversity, she noticed that the skills people used in triumphing could be grouped into 5 categories: skills of optimism, skills of will, social support development skills, practical skills, and skills of purpose. Today, we'll be using that framework to understand just which qualities and skills will be most useful for us to have when those inevitable tough times come along. Cabanato's subjects used a multitude of approaches, so it seems there is no one right way to approach adversity. The skills that someone finally employs may be driven by a combination of factors: the particular circumstance, their own personality and skill set, and also what the nature of the challenge is. So with that in mind, let's look at what we mean when we say resilience. Most of the time, when mental health professionals talk about resilience, they're referring primarily to psychological hardiness and secondarily to physical toughness. Yet the term resilience was first used in the physical sciences to describe the behaviour of a spring. In fact, the word resilience is designed from the Latin resalire, to spring back, just like Dolly does here. You can knock her over, but you can't keep her down for long. She just bounces back up. For our purposes today, we'll define psychological resilience, the type we're examining, as the ability of a person to deal with adversity without succumbing to psychological breakdown, such as a mental illness or acts of self-harm, or resorting to antisocial acts. The truly resilient person manages to live with a modicum of peace or even joy, despite difficult circumstances. So, the 64,000 question: how do they do it? Let's look at the crucial area of optimism skills first. Imagine this: you're an oncology specialist, meaning you deal exclusively with cancer cases. Recently, 2 young men, both in their mid-20s, were admitted for treatment. Both have similar life circumstances and also the exact kind of cancer as one another. The prognosis for one man, Jake, is thus highly similar to the one for Bill. But over the weeks, rolling onto months of treatment, you notice some crucial differences. Jake firmly believes that his cancer is just a blip on the horizon of happiness. Won't last long. He thinks, and anyway, he's got a lot of other good stuff going on in his life. His studies, his fiancée, his service as a mentor to younger men in the community. The cancer doesn't affect these. And besides, he says the cancer is nothing personal. It just happened. It's no one's fault. He reckons he'll get over it soon. Now, Jake responds well to the treatments, and his cancer is soon declared in remission. He goes home after the last treatments looking relaxed, happy, and he's relatively well. Bill, meanwhile, is a worrywart. He frets that the doctors won't know how to treat him properly, that the cancer will plague him permanently, that it's ruining his whole life. He wonders what he's done to deserve this terrible illness. His treatment gets prolonged as his body doesn't seem to respond well. Some things go wrong in a few of his procedures, and Bill gets sicker and sicker. Eventually, he's put into a hospice and told to get his affairs in order. What was the difference between the 2 men at the outset? Well, as far as you can tell, it was only that Jake was an optimist. Bill was not. Now, This example may seem simplistic, and of course you're right, but it's no less true for that. Proponents of the school of positive psychology, such as Martin Seligman, claim that there are literally hundreds of studies which show that pessimists get discouraged and give up more easily, while optimists' performance at work and in academic and sporting arenas tends to exceed predictions made for them. They generally enjoy excellent health, the capacity to age well, and even increased longevity. In other words, they are resilient. Let's look at those skills up close. Adopting an optimistic, explanatory style. Probably the most commonly known optimistic skill is that of adopting an optimistic explanatory style. Seligman and his associates performed a number of experiments in which they found that both human and animal subjects who were subjected to unpleasant experience, say a noise or shock, which they could not control, eventually they learnt to be hopeless or helpless. The subjects retained a sense of helplessness, even if in later experiments they regained the capacity to control the unpleasant experience. Obviously, if we think that we have no control, we'll not make any effort to change our bad situation. That people would learn to be helpless and not unlearn it when their situation changed didn't really surprise the researchers. But what did happen, contrary to that expectation, was that in most of the experiments, about 1/3 of the subjects who had been treated to noise or shock, which they couldn't control, didn't learn to be helpless. No matter what was thrown at them, this 1/3 continued to believe, for the human subjects, that they could solve the problem, turn off the noise or whatever it was. And this was true even when they were given unsolvable problems. Even the rat and dog subjects showed similar results. Seligman and his colleagues realized that those who refused to learn helplessness were the true optimists, and further, that others could learn their style of thinking and explaining things. Positive psychology was born. To adopt an optimistic explanatory style, there are 3 crucial aspects that we must pay attention to. Permanence, whether we believe that a given event will go on for a long time or not. Pessimists believe that bad events will go on for a long time, whereas optimists believe just the opposite, that the tough stuff is about to end. The example, an optimist who lost her job would tend to believe that she could replace it fairly readily. Pervasiveness, how specific or universal the event is. In other words, how much of our lives it pervades. Pessimists believe that the difficult happening will spread from one area of life to others, whereas optimists are quick to point out that a given difficult circumstance is limited in scope. The optimist, for example, may have lost their job, but she will observe that she still has excellent health and supportive relationships. In other words, she will say, the bad news is confined to the work area and does not affect other aspects of her life. And personalised. Whether it is we or others who get the blame for the bad stuff that happens, or the credit for the achievements, optimists consistently attribute failures to causes outside themselves. Pessimists, conversely, tend to blame themselves, even when they should not. The job-losing optimist might, for instance, feel that she had performed well in the role, but she was let go because the organisation was going through some kind of downturn. In addition to an optimistic explanatory style, there are several other optimistic skills. Social comparison thinking. This optimist skill can work for our resilience or against it, depending on how we use it. It involves comparing ourselves with others. As an optimism skill, it means finding a favourable reference group and comparing ourselves with that, rather than a group which immediately disadvantages us. Let me give you an example of that one. Let's say you decide that you want to learn to play guitar. So you enroll on a guitar class. You'd never played an instrument before and you don't know really much about music, but you have enrolled in a university guitar class, and guess what? All the other students are music majors. They play multiple instruments, or they're well versed in music theory and have well-tuned ears. When you compare your progress with theirs, are you being fair to yourself? Well, probably not. I mean, will that help your resistance? Well, sorry, but probably not much. A better way to employ social comparison thinking as an optimist skill would be to say, compare your rate of weight loss with dieters who started at a similar weight to you, or who had experienced similar issues in trying to lose weight. The point here is, if you want to be resilient and give yourself a fair fighting chance, or better yet, maybe just drop the comparisons altogether. Silver lining thinking. Avoid focusing illusions. The optimism skill of silver lining thinking goes hand in hand with avoiding what researchers have called focusing illusions. It's about acknowledging the dark clouds, say an impending divorce or diagnosis of a serious or incurable condition, but refusing to give an inappropriate amount of attention, focus, to certain feared aspects of the cloud, concentrating instead on the silver linings in the cloud. Some aspects of the situation that may be positive despite the overall tough circumstances. An example of this occurred in the late 1890s when getting AIDS was pretty much a death sentence. On an AIDS roadshow set up to promote safe sex, one of the AIDS patients participating was asked how he was managing to live so cheerfully and with such obvious happiness, given his condition. Oh, he said, that's easy. I, or many others with AIDS, know that our time may be limited, so we just let the rubbish go by. That is, he saw the dark cloud, the spectre of death hanging over him, and decided not to focus on his probable shortened lifespan, in looking instead at the quality of his relationships and the enjoyable and meaningful things that he could do with his time. His resiliency reframed, I'm probably going to die before too long, to, I have a wonderful quality of life now, thus avoiding the focusing illusion that all of life now must be held ransom or focused on early death. Take advantage of opportunities. The skill of seeing and then taking up opportunities is a response which expresses trust that a better future exists and that it can be attained. In other words, an optimistic response. History is rife with people who, in the face of some unfortunate experience, nevertheless maximized it by a sideways response, which utilized what resources were available in the moment. Julio Iglesias once told an interviewer making a documentary film about him that his singing career may not even have gotten off the ground were it not for having broken his leg as a teenager. Lying there in traction in hospital, Julio could not move much, let alone get back on the playing field to do the football he was really so keen to play. Someone brought him a guitar to fool around with, and as they say, the rest is history. Julio took full advantage of the months on his back to begin an endeavour that would define his life. Another category of resilience skill which we need to be aware of is that of the will skills. There are few stories in the world literature where the hero prevails merely by curling up in a corner until the drama is all over. The ability to engage one's will appropriately may be the cornerstone of the resilient response. Without one's will on side, even the brightest optimist thought degrades into mere wishful thinking. Opportunities slip away, barely noticed. They're escape bedeviling the hero throughout most of the action. Psychosynthesis writer Roberto Assagioli notes that our human will has at least three main aspects. Aspect number one is that of strong will. This is the energy, intensity, or fire in the belly to accomplish something, and also the aspect of will that come to mind for most people when they think about will. Aspect number 2 is that of skillful will, which we could say is the most efficient and effective means of accomplishing something, as opposed to the most obvious or direct path. Aspect number 3 is that of goodwill, which is a sense of orienting ourselves toward the general good in our plans, although goodwill should include consideration of ourselves as well. It's said that all 3 aspects need to be present generally in order to achieve success at an endeavour, and that uniting these with love would activate what is called transpersonal will. Most resilient skills are based either directly or indirectly on the capacity to engage will. So let's look at some of the more direct will skills. Never give up hope. All of us can be grateful for the persistence, a quality of strong will, on the part of Thomas Edison, the inventor of the light bulb. Edison is said to have tried thousands of substances before having success with carbon wire in his electric light bulb. It was surely a resilient person who came up with the saying that the impossible only takes a little longer. Refusing to give up hope that things will turn out all right, even amidst crushing defeat, is the hallmark of a person whose will has been activated, and they are also most probably an optimist. Know when to surrender. Paradoxically, although there is much resilience in the capacity to remain ever hopeful, genuine resilience also demands that we know when to surrender. And let's be clear here, surrendering is not the same as giving up. Giving up is about loss of hope. It's a will disengagement, a spirit crushed. Surrender, rather, is a willed act, one in which a person undertakes precisely because acknowledging human limitation and lack of control in a situation offers the greatest opportunity to prevail, to survive. If you're working as a mental health practitioner, what tendency do you observe in your clients to actively engage their will or to surrender? How do they know which is the more appropriate in the context of their ultimate triumph over the difficult situation? If it's surrender, it's genuine surrender, that is a willed act. Or do you sense that they might be just giving up? Mind power skills as resilience boosters. If you want to help grow your client's hardiness, a good place to work from is the mind power skills. Let's review the connection between mind power and resilience. Nothing comes into being on planet Earth without there being a blueprint in the ether. Houses under construction follow an official paper blueprint. A tailor's sewing a dress follows a pattern of what the finished dress is going to look like. And company restructurings take place after elaborate consultation and planning to decide on how the ultimate organisational chart should look. We bring into reality what we are able to conceive. We conceive that which we can visualise, feel or hear in our minds. We can create much more strongly in our minds, giving our subconscious the command to gather up the energy of manifestation in the physical world. If we've developed our will sufficiently for the unconscious parts of ourselves to hear that command. You know these skills already. Affirmations, visualizations, feeling the positive emotions you'll feel when you manifest what you want. Seeding, as that's called. Express frustration through creative channels. In some cases, the client's tough time will be occurring not because nothing has manifested, but because something has happened which is unpalatable, which is hard to accept. The client feels frustrated and the energy of frustration mounts. The client may be working on practical levels to sort out the situation, retaining legal assistance, say, in the instance of victimization. But the person may be working steadily on a mind power level to slowly work their will into the unfortunate circumstance. But assistance is required for immediate release of the pent-up energy. Imagine this scene. You're accused of a crime you did not commit. You're wrongly jailed with a very long non-parole period. Of course, if you're able, you'll appeal the incorrect verdict. But what do you do to relieve the everyday frustration, boredom, and rage at the injustice you're suffering? It's an exercise of resilience via skillful will, not without some goodwill towards yourself. To take on some form of creating to help assuage the frustration. You may write about your situation, draw, sculpt, paint, or even just plunge yourself into intense physical exercise. As a therapist, guide, you can facilitate discussions with clients to help them maintain equilibrium and physical health while going through their terrible time. And while they will be using much skillful will in doing this, they will also be exercising goodwill, or what could be called the skills of loving compassion. Goodwill, the skills of loving compassion. As we've already noted, exercising goodwill means including the welfare of others, the greater good, in one's intentions. Even if a person were to have exemplary levels of strong and skillful will, he would be defeated if he were to exclude goodwill from his acts of will. Fortunately, showing goodwill to ourselves is part of the deal, and indeed may be the crucial ingredient needed with some challenging situations. The following skills show how goodwill can make the difference between psychologically surviving and not. So be willing to shift the goalposts. Did you make your plans before your situation changed? Do you need to review them now in light of what has happened? Susan had a goal to run a marathon after having done half marathons for many years. But 2 weeks before the big event, she experienced a terrible asthma attack, followed by a respiratory illness. She had to conclude that running a marathon was not going to be appropriate that year, as her lungs were in no condition to do so. But she still wanted to participate. She decided that this year, the 10-kilometre walk run would be as good as it got. Facing reality with acceptance, one day at a time. Anyone who has ever been caught in a long-term bad time, as in recovering from a chronic ailment or bankruptcy, or say dealing with a court case, can identify with the actually brilliant book title, I Try to Take One Day at a Time, but sometimes several days attack me at once. Cabanato found in her research that in all of the long-haul ordeals, people nominated the response of just doing one day at a time as a key strategy to get through. If we analyse what is involved in this, we inevitably find elements of attuning our personal will to the larger transpersonal will. That is, we're only ever motivated to use the mantra of one day at a time when the days are so challenging that contemplating them rolling on and on ad infinitum is too hard. We can't, for example, imagine surviving years of living in excruciating pain. But every morning we can wake up, salute the sun, grit our teeth and say, okay, I guess I can get through today in this condition. The capacity to keep recontracting with ourselves is a trusting act of will, the source for which lies beyond our bodies, feelings and minds, though all of those may be recruited to help us in getting through. The source of energy or capacity that allows the deal is at the level of the self. That is, spirit of transpersonal will. It's larger than a single conscious person's will and ever present to us all. But we know how to access the willingness, and here's the word again, to trust some sort of universal aspect, or what we are calling transpersonal will, comes through using, which means activating and developing one's personal will as often as possible. Dealing with uncertainty. I realise I'm going on here about will skills, but I just find them so interesting. There are just two more I'd like to point out. A surprising finding by resilience writers is that of the uncertainty principle, which says that even bad news known is better than living in uncertainty. Peter Ubel gives two excellent examples of this principle in operation. During World War II, London Central was bombed nightly by the Nazis. The suburbs around London were bombed occasionally. Now, objectively speaking, getting bombed every single night is worse than getting bombed once in a while. But doctors and others began to realise that it was the people of the suburbs whose stomachs were getting ulcerated much more frequently. The explanation arrived at was that the central London residents knew that they were being bombed every night, and so they could prepare for it, expect it. But the suburban residents lived in uncertainty, never knowing when they would be bombed, which was more stressful. It was they who developed most of the stomach ulcers. The second example of the uncertainty principle is that of people in the 1980s who took the test to find out if they were HIV positive. In those days, it took 6 weeks to find out. Curiously, most of the men who went through the experience said that the 6 weeks of being in limbo were worse than an ultimate diagnosis of being HIV positive. Apparently, even bad news, known, is easier to deal with, to accept into one's life, than uncertainty. The take-home message of resilience here is that if we want to thrive, we must learn how to deal with uncertainty. While thinking optimistically and using will effectively are mostly intrapersonal strategies to help an individual respond resilient to adversity, some types of resilient responses are essentially interpersonal. We look at the cluster skills in the support category. How good are your social networks? The saying of "no man is an island" seems no truer anywhere than in the realm of resilience. Happiness author and business coach Avla Parker lists 10 traits of resilience, happy people. In the very first one, she notes that resilient people are strong people who realise the importance of having a good social support system and are able to surround themselves with supportive friends and family. Similarly, organisational advisor and facilitator David Little, addressing managers, names 6 traits of resilience in organisational healers, among which is team support. Although you are a strong individual, you know the value of social support and are able to surround yourself with supportive colleagues and strong leaders. There are 2 sub-skills a person needs here: developing rational capacity and balancing dependence and independence. Developing relational capacity. If your networks are not well developed, you can ask yourself, how much do you trust people? How good are you at reaching out? What is your capacity for supporting others, for intimacy? Balance dependence and independence. In most Western countries, people are trained from an early age to be independent, and dependence gets very bad press. Yet dependence, the ability to ask for help, comfort or solace, softens a world that can seem harsh and unrelenting. It's difficult to imagine a society in which citizens are prescribed from asking one another for help so cold and unemotional that it surely would be. Most people who prevail over tough times say they would not have gotten through their adversity had it not been for their networks of support, whether those were mainly at family, community, national or even international level. Most people realise that in some way that their ability to triumph is due in part to their ability to go into either mode, that of independence or that of dependence, as appropriate. Both are needed for wholeness. Mostly survivors seem to work their will as well as they can, initiating actions that seem logical to get themselves out of their mess, but then being unapologetic about it and unafraid to ask for help when they've exhausted their own resources. The point with any development of social support networks is that you need to do it now. By the time catastrophe hits and you need the relationship, it can be too late. So where are we up to? We've examined optimism skills, will skills, social support skills, and the fourth category of Get Through Resilience skill is a cluster of skills that we could call practice resilience skills, practical resilience skills. While this talk is focused on emotional resilience, few would argue that adequate preparation in the physical, material world will help minimise loss and thus the concomitant need for emotional adjustment to loss. If in your helping role you are coaching someone towards greater resilience, don't dismiss this category as irrelevant. At the very least, it's important to recognise the types of preparation that could make the difference between merely surviving a tough time and being able to thrive through it. As the saying goes, the time to prepare for adversity is now, before it hits. Let me list some typical preparedness areas. Have a think as I name them about how well prepared you are, or your client is if you're working with someone on this very important area of resilience. Well, arranging insurance. Getting a survival kit together for the home and keeping it up to date. Getting important documents and items together, ready to be grabbed in an instance. Plans developed for where family members should assemble in an emergency. Emergency numbers collected and copied with copies with all the household members. Generators in working order with fuel if you need power. Some monies, liquid, that are easily accessible for quick use. Storm shutters and other emergency matters ready to be deployed. A will, a written estate, and executors assigned. An alarm system installed and positively monitored. Medical and dental visits, examinations and prescriptions, all up to date. There may be many more categories of preparation that would help people get through a disaster or a difficult time in a resilient way. This level of preparation is important in terms of being prepared, grounded, and thus ready to take on whatever may come. Ultimately, though, practical preparations cannot compare with the advantage of a mobilised will matched by clear purpose if one is to conquer adversity. Let's look now at that final cluster of skills, those of purpose. There's a little secret we should disclose. When people show resilience using the skills of purpose, they're actually using will skills. Assagioli proposed stages of the willed act. The first stage, he said, is that of having a clear intention, a purpose. Purpose is derived from that which has meaning for an individual, and that is generated from the person's values. We come to know what values we embrace through being forged in the fire of life. We have a difficult time which offers two stark choices. Which will we choose? We find ourselves in an unenviable or even unpalatable position, and working out what to do to get out of it involves our will, working in conjunction with our purpose, and if we are living authentically, reflecting our values. Living on purpose is thus living willfully. You might wonder why I'm separating out these purpose skills from the other will skills. Well, to me, it's inspiring when people use pain to achieve a purpose wrought for the common good. What am I talking about here? Well, there are so many beautiful examples that we could take. Well, one, the cancer patients who joined support groups to get help during the journey through cancer, but then remained in the groups after their cancer is in remission in order to help those who are newly diagnosed. Similarly, in Alcoholics Anonymous, a person who's been in recovery successfully some time agrees to be a sponsor, a person in the first phases, for a person who's in the first phases of recovery from alcohol abuse. Women's refuge centres are full of female helpers who've been mistreated or abused and do not want any other woman to go through what they did. The good news is that the natural, altruistic striving of people in pain to help others avoid similar pain not only brings the helper into greater attunement with his or her higher purpose and thus greater resilience, but it also helps others in the community. It's really a total win-win situation born of dealing with adversity. You may remember the story of the 3 stonecutters building a medieval cathedral. When each of 3 stonecutters were asked in turn what they were doing, the first angrily replied, "As you can see, I'm cutting stone." The second replied, "I'm earning a life for myself and my family." And the third stonecutter responded joyously, "I'm building a great cathedral." The last stonecutter was able to respond with joy because with great clarity of purpose, he realized that he was partnering with a goal much larger than himself. Our discussion today has explored the types of responses to adversity, resilience skills, which have been successfully used by hardy people to prevail over difficult times. We've identified 5 chief categories of resilience skill. The optimism skills, skills of effective use of will, skills of garnering social support, practical preparedness skills, and skills of connection with purpose. Ultimately, notions of resilience are at the heart of what we do as mental health professionals, whether we call it that or not. Our professions would not exist if clients believed that they did not sometimes need even a little help in order to psychologically survive, let alone thrive. Whatever interventions we make on their behalf, they are backed by a desire to see clients choose responses to challenges that will last a distance. That is, be helpful and growth engendering in the long term. Hippocrates said that the natural healing force within each of us is the greatest force in getting well. Perhaps our best role is to stand by clients, patiently helping them to recognize the immense power and endless potential that they can access if they connect with that inner healing force, the resilient self that is the source of triumph over adversity.